What's up? Have you ever wondered about the concept of Wu-Wei, the Taoist concept of effortless action, sometimes called the action of inaction or no action? Well, you're in luck, because today on the Existential Stoic Podcast, we're going to talk about that. And I want to give a shout out real quick to listener John B for the suggestion. It's excellent, so we're happy to talk about it. I'm Danny here with my buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
Yo, Danny.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Wu-Wei today from Taoism, which
Well,
is kind of
before
cool.
we get into that, some people might
Yeah.
ask, what is Wu-Wei or Wu-Wei or however you pronounce it? Well, it turns out Wu-Wei is one of the central ideas in the Tao Te Ching, traditionally attributed to Lao Tzu. It's often translated as non-action, but this is misleading. Wu-Wei does not mean doing nothing, laziness, passivity, withdrawal from the world. Wu-Wei does mean acting without forcing, acting in harmony with the Tao, acting without ego-driven striving, letting actions arise naturally from a situation, and Wu Wei is action that flows rather than action that pushes.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Yeah, and some of the core insights behind it is that, it rests on fundamental Taoist claim, basically that reality already has a natural order. And you see this, the Tao in Taoism literally means like, the way, right? So it's like the way or the flow of the universe. So problems arise when we try to dominate, control, or improve it aggressively. It's very, it's funny because it's very anti-Western in a sense in how we kind of think and operate on our culture. So when we impose rigid plans, moral rules, or personal ambition on the world, we create resistance, generate unintended consequences, and disrupt harmony. So Wu Wei is about responding appropriately, not controlling outcomes. And I always found this really fascinating because it is kind of, at least for Westerners like in the US and stuff, this is very odd the first time you read it, I guess.
Well, it's
'Cause-
it's it's not like there's a book like The Seven Habits of Highly Effective Taoists.
no. No. It's funny. I was looking over Taoism again recently, actually, and like one of the things I really and it kind of reminds because Taoism it was like 500 BC, long time ago. This is like roughly about the time when the early ancient Greeks were starting to do philosophy as well. And I always found it interesting when you look back at those early works, you get a lot of stuff that's written like Taoism. It's written in verse. There's 81 verses in the Tao Te Ching. You look at like Marcus Aurelius Meditations, it's journal entries. If you look at like Epictetus's Handbook or the Enchiridion, it's like little tiny snippets. And I always kind of like that because philosophy you kind of need to digest and reflect on. And when you get these like small parts, you can take your time and kind of like jump in rather than these long essays and books
hmm
that I think you kind of get lost in all the nonsense, you know?
Yeah, especially how like most books, you know the answer from just reading the title, and yet they need to sell you 30,000 words, or else no one's
Yeah,
going to buy
right.
it.
I know. And this is like really nice. But yeah, so the concept of I think this is something, we're constantly fighting against the universe in a way, if you think about it. Like we're always trying to make things, we're always trying to force it. It's like the way I always think of it is like, if reality is a river, we're always like trying to push against the current to make things happen. Like we're trying to get things done now. We're impatient, we're trying to do things that maybe we're not ready for, or maybe that aren't right for us at this time. And I think that's a big, Taoism, there's this old poster, I don't know if you remember, it had like funny sayings and like funny ways of looking at things. And it was like Taoism was like shit happens, you know? And I think that's not actually that incorrect because like when you think about it, it's like we have to sort of recognize that there is this world and we're acting kind of with it and along with it. And if we're doing things in the right way, it won't feel difficult or hard, like we're pushing against everything to make it happen. Because it's like doing the right thing at the right time, in the right situation, with the flow of everything else.
Well, I like how you said that twice in there, going against the current or going with the flow. Because what I was remembering was back in the day, I used to do SEO, and there was this company that I learned from called OMG Machines, which was like the best people in SEO back in the day. And I went to a conference by them, and in the conference, they were talking about this exact thing, like going against the current or going with the flow in life. And they're like, you've all been in that spot where you've been going against the current and it requires so much energy and you're just exhausted and you feel like you're pushing a boulder up a hill and it never starts to end. And then you've also had the experience where you've been going with the flow where things are effortless. And they're like, really, if you think about it, the only way that you should ever expend any energy is to get into the current. So to like, if you're not going with the flow, expend energy to get into the current so you can get with the flow, but don't go against it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of I like that example too, because that also was reminding me when you're talking about that. When we were reading Martha Beck's book, and she was talking about, all her clients that would come in and they'd complain about like exhaustion and like, depression or like also like physical pain. And like it turned out they hated their job and like their body's trying to tell them something. And that's like, those are like perfect examples, I think, of what this concept kind of means. It's like one, listening to ourselves. And I think the Taoists were very, that's a big, important part of Taoism is like self-awareness and being aware, right? Like recognizing
Hmm.
like, hey, this isn't right for me. Something's telling me this is wrong. Maybe that's why I feel like crap, and maybe that's why I'm exhausted. Or like you were suggesting, right? Like expending all this energy fighting constantly, you end up being like miserable after the fact because you're not doing what's right for you. You're not doing what's right at the right moment. And so you're constantly just struggling through life, and it's kind of horrible.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a book that I just recently read called The Pain Habit, all about that. Because like mo almost, I mean, I think they've gotten to the point with like fMRI and all that stuff, where pretty much any chronic pain that's not due to cancer or like a couple other specific things is just because we're not listening to ourselves. Like pain is a signal, we're not listening to ourselves, and because of that, we have this chronic pain. And it's interesting because like everywhere you go nowadays, people are like trying to sell you this pain stuff, and it's a lot of times it's just like I mean I don't want to talk poorly about chiropractors because I went to them and it was good for a while, but like a lot of what they do, they just induce fear. I look back at my time with the chiropractor because I was in pain for a long time and now I'm not. And so like all the time with the chiropractor, they just induce pain, saying that like if your body's not aligned perfectly, you're going to be in so much pain and you're going to end up crippled. And it's like no wonder you're freaking terrified and like nonstop
Yeah.
in pain until they can adjust you, and that lasts for a day, a week, whatever, and then you got to go back for your next fix. It's-
Well, yeah, I think that's one of our problems, though, is I think, especially like in speaking specifically of the US, obviously it's my frame of reference, but, you know, we're, I think we over rationalize and we put so much emphasis on like reason and science over everything else. Like that like it's possible to do things by willpower alone, right? Or that it's possible to just like rationalize our way through things without listening to like anything else, like our bodies, like the natural world, like the world, like, what's going on around us, being totally like, I mean, and some of that too is like not paying attention to any of it as well, I think. And that's part of the problem, right? We kind of like, we give too much weight to one thing rather than sort of being holistic and aware of all of what makes us up.
Yeah, we definitely have come a long way from where humans originally were. Because I was sitting outside looking at a bird the other day, and I was like, "Man, this is beautiful." And then I was like, "Holy, wait a second! Like, not more than like 200 to 500 years ago, people spent all their time outside with like birds and stuff like that. And now it's like, gee, I should spend more time outside because all I'm doing is playing video
Yeah.
games and whatever else."
Well, like life was a lot slower too, I think, and people had more time to like pay attention to things like that. I don't think they do anymore. It's
Hmm.
amazing too how good it makes you feel just going out in nature and just like looking at things, letting yourself feel that sense of awe. It's
Hmm.
kind of crazy. It's funny too, actually, the story of how the Tao Te Ching was written, because it's like a legend,
Yeah.
was Lao Tzu is like I think if I remember correctly, I might get this wrong. He was like a historian or something for one of the
Well, people
emperors
aren't
at the time.
sure. At
Yeah, I
least
mean,
the history that I listened to, like he could be something like an old guy, but he could just be a collection of people. Nobody's
yeah,
really sure.
yeah. Like the legend that's been passed down was he was like this guy and like wanted to leave basically, and a guard at the gate was like,
Mhm.
"Well, you gotta leave something." So he sat under a tree, wrote down these 81 verses, and left, and was never heard from again. It's a very
Mhm.
nice legend, and it
Mhm.
gives that very like it gives a lot of weight, I think, to the to the text. But it's
Mhm.
it's kind of funny because it's like that leaving behind all these things that kind of are getting in the way too. There's kind of that sense as well.
Yeah.
Like society, you know, it's got a lot of benefit, but it also has a lot of problems that take us away from, what we are. Because we are, and we forget, I know we're animals. And like,
Mhm.
you think about it, it's kind of crazy, but you can spend your whole day never stepping foot in the natural world.
Mhm.
Literally, like never seeing it, especially if you live in a city, like not even at all, right? You're
Mhm.
just constantly surrounded by all this like prefab stuff that's very, you know, fixed and very like homogeneous, and you're not seeing sort of the world as it really is, or what's kind of right for us, maybe,
Mhm.
which is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let's see. Oh, yeah. So like it's also really interesting how like, he talks about the Tao that can be named is not the Tao. And so it's not something, it's not this like theorized thing. And I think that comes to what we're talking about Wu-Wei here, where it's not like Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's flow, where like you can just, you know, you just, I don't even know what he talks about in that book. It's just a long treatise that everybody mentions, but that really just says when things are going right, they're going right. But it's more of like an experiential type of thing. The only way to do it is to feel it. If you think like this is it, let me describe it. No, that's not it. So it kind of brings that back. And then the whole idea of like action without action, because it's interesting, like breathing. You can't stop doing it. Your body will do it by yourself. And I also think
Yeah.
about like floating on your back in the water. Like you don't have to do anything. You're just floating. But like instead we like struggle and we look like drowning monkeys and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting, I think some examples that always come to mind for me when I'm thinking of this is like, if you think of a lot of people have played instruments or have played a sport, right, when they're younger. And if you think of doing that, like if you were going to perform at a concert or like a recital or you were going to play in a game and you had to rationally think about all the things you were doing, you would be terrible. Like you would make so many mistakes. You would be always kind of behind the action, especially in a game or even in music, right? You'd always be behind because you'd be thinking through everything. So the way to get around that is you practice a ton, right? You build the muscle memory so that when things happen, you can respond in the best way that you're able to. And I think that's kind of like what this has in mind, right? It's this idea of like we can be kind of with the flow of everything and acting correctly with it, not against it, not pushing back. And so we're doing the best thing at the best time essentially for us,
Hmm.
and I think, but it's not always maybe and I guess that's the hard part for us is like we have all these aspirations, goals, and things that we're trying to make happen faster than they should, maybe, or, we're trying to push things, we're struggling against the world around us, the society around us. And so it makes it very hard to sort of get into that mindset or, kind of get into that kind of flow of action.
Yeah, not only that, but also recognizing what is right effort. Because like I think one of the
Yeah.
biggest problems that people have is we want a problem-free life. But like it just doesn't happen. And so like, you're expending effort to deal with problems and you're like, I shouldn't have to do this because Wu-Wei says it should be effortless action. But it might not be true. Like it might be that the effort is necessary and it's just like I don't remember the exact way that Marcus Aurelius says it, but like I think it was in book I don't remember book 10 or something of the Meditations where he talks about like this is you're waking up to do the job of a human. And the job of a human is to deal with all this BS and these problems and overcome all this stuff and live with virtue and character and all this in spite of it. And so like why are you complaining that you're waking up to this job when this is like your nature?
Yeah. I mean, that's one way to look at it, right? It's like what is kind of understanding our nature better, understanding, we're able to do. It's funny too, because like I think with Taoism too, like a lot of like, especially a lot of ancient philosophy, I think you get this sort of recognition that we need to let go too of a lot of these like extraneous desires we have. And I think like it says like, like when we're talking about like transforming the self, it's like letting go of the ego, right? Reducing excessive desire, abandoning the need for recognition and control, right? Because these are all things that are going to get in the way and cause us to act against the current. It's a very similar actually too. It's funny to Epicurus, his idea of like natural and artificial desires, right? Like there's natural desires that we have to do because they're needed, right? Like you get thirsty, there's a biological impulse, you drink water, right? Or you're hungry, same thing, right? Need to go to the bathroom, that kind of stuff. Those are all natural. You need to do those to live your life. And there's also natural, like in the sense of like exercise, right? You'll be healthier, that kind of thing. But then there's also all these artificial desires created by society around us, like the need for, fame, recognition, the need to be validated, right? The need to have all this stuff. I mean, advertising now is like the epitome of artificial desires. And so we're constantly also, I think, fighting against all this stuff in our world that's telling us we need all this crap that we don't actually really need to be happy or to be like, good people in the world and living a good life. And so it's like this constant battle we're fighting, which is very hard too. It makes it very hard to adopt these, I think, in the
Yeah.
current
Plus,
times.
plus, I also think we have the wrong models. Like
Yes.
we
Yes,
are,
we do.
yeah. So like
Definitely.
it's really interesting because I listened to this interview that we were talking about the Tony Robbins and Alex Hormozy one, and he has been living, Alex Hormozy was talking about how he's been living his whole life under the premise of F happiness because it's just not important. And he's been suffering a lot because of that. And
Yeah,
then there was Elon Musk in his biography talking about how like everyone looks up to my life, but if they actually knew how hard it was and how terrible it was, they you just like be careful what you wish for. And then there was this dude who I met like years ago who was the first multimillionaire I met. And I was like, thinking like his life was going to be freaking awesome because he's a multimillionaire. And I was like, dude, what does it feel like to be a millionaire? And he's like, it feels the same as it did to be broke. And like three very clear examples that money does not correlate at all to happiness beyond like a certain amount. Like if you have the essentials to live, maybe like 70,000 a year or something in the US, whatever that number is. But like if you have your basic necessities met, food, clothing, shelter, transportation, whatever, then beyond that, money doesn't do anything. And yet, those are the exact models that everybody is striving
yeah.
and trying so hard to become because they think that's going to give them happiness.
Well, that's what's funny, right? Because we live in this society, we're told all our lives that this is the ideal, right? Make tons of money, get famous. But those are things that are like come with so many of their own problems. They make you, that means you're going to be working nonstop. You're forgetting about yourself, like Alex, right? Not even paying attention to happiness. Like that's insane. It's funny too, because you look back, I always think about this too. You look back at all these, especially like you look at all these ancient philosophers, and like so many of them were focused on what makes a good life and a flourishing life or a happy life. Basically, that's what they were interested in. And it's like, and it's funny that none of them say like money, fame, honor, recognition, all
Mm,
this crap that we focus on so much because all of it is also external. You don't have control over it.
hmm
You could make tons of money and lose it instantly, right? You could be famous and get canceled or something, right? So many things can happen that you have no control over. And yet at the same time, when you're doing all that, you're not doing anything working on yourself. You're not paying attention to your mental health. You're not listening to yourself. You have all these people coming after you for things, right? It's like you're getting pulled in all these directions rather than being able to do what's natural to you.
Yeah, I heard an
Yeah.
interesting definition in the book, The Art of Spending Money, about what makes for a pretty good life. And the guy said independence plus purpose. Independent, and he just like stressed it over and over again. He was like independence plus purpose, independence
Mm,
plus purpose. And he's like, because if you can figure out a way to be independent where you don't have to rely on other people, you don't have to rely on someone else's time clock, all that stuff, and then you have some type of drive, some purpose that makes you feel like you're growing, like you're learning, like you're contributing, that's really all you can ask for. And it's really interesting because he does not say being really rich. And he's a guy who's probably well into the multimillionaire, probably like hundreds
yeah.
of millions by this point. And the answer is not being rich, which is crazy.
Yeah. Well, I think this is the hard part, right? Because it's like, and this is always one of the struggles, I think, whenever, I mean, I know whenever I've taught Taoism, especially, or like any really of the ancients too, it's like, I think it's always hard for us too, because it requires such a shift in how we think that it can seem so like unrealistic at first because it's very contrary to how our normal thinking is, which is they would argue is wrong, right? And so
Hmm.
like it
Yeah.
requires kind of a big shift and letting go of a lot of stuff, not trying to force things. And I think that's the biggest problem, right? Is that we're all trying to force this stuff rather
Hmm.
than kind of doing it right. And like you were even mentioning before, right? There's been so many studies that have shown like, and it's something like 75 or 70,000 or something in the US, but like after that, money contributes almost nothing to happiness.
Hmm.
And basically it's because initially it takes care of like all those key things that you need to live that are
Hmm.
highly stressful, like a place to live, food.
Right.
But once you've done that, it's like, a
Yeah, you can get
Toyota
a little
Corolla
bit
versus a
nicer car.
Porsche.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
does it matter at the end of the
No,
day? Yeah,
no.
it's kind of insane.
Yeah. And so then let's see, there was something else that I was just thinking about that clearly left me. Hmm.
Well, here's another thing that I think is really interesting too with Taoism. I think this is one of the interesting things about it is that it is sort of this like both awareness of self and awareness of the world around you. And one of the things I really find interesting is like when it comes to like ethics or acting correctly, like Taoism argues like if you're doing it right, when you're acting with the flow, you don't need moral rules. You
Hmm.
don't need guidance because they should come from within, right? They should be things that, are already in you that you're acting on essentially that are natural to you. And, we usually think of it as like these externals we have to conform to rather than something that comes from within us that we're aligned with correctly.
That's an interesting point because like they say that one of the ways for people to stop doing like uh drugs or bad behavior is to do hallucinogenics or so like mushrooms, acid, those types of things. And I had the experience on mushrooms where like stuff that I was doing that was somewhat wrong to me, but I was kind of like suppressing it. When I was on mushrooms, I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. Like I need to stop that. And it's crazy because it's kind of like lining up with your own North Star or whatever you want to call it. But then when you're not under the influence, you start to see, hey, this stuff wasn't right and I was doing that anyways. So
It's
maybe I
one of
should
the, actually
change
that's one
that.
of the things they've found. Like a lot of the studies they've been doing actually with hallucinogens have found basically that, which is like it allows people to like, I guess, kind of like what you were saying, like unlock more like an awareness of their own self in that state. And it's like done correctly, obviously, and like, done the right way. It can really actually be beneficial, which is interesting. It can give you kind of like a very quick awareness of oneself rather than like having to do it and struggling kind of through it. You're taking yourself out of the
Yeah.
norm. Yeah, it's kind of
I think it's
interesting.
interesting because it's like a brief moment of enlightenment. It doesn't last and it's not going to keep you there forever, but like you can see what the end goal of meditation or something like that would be.
Yeah, right, right.
Uh-huh.
I think but that's hard, right? Is like figuring out like what is that for us, you know? Knowing yourself is not easy. And I think too, a lot of us too, it's like, you know, we expect so much from ourselves when we're younger
Mm.
that like really is unrealistic. Like I think about that a lot. Like when you go to college and you first enter the working world, we act like we're adults, like we know ourselves. Our brain's not even fully developed. Like, and when you think back, like I can tell I'm so much more level-headed now than I ever was when I was younger, and stuff, and know
Hmm.
myself so much more because you can take the time to do it. I think so. Part of it is just maybe experience and time, too,
Yeah.
is kind of required to kind of get there. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And also just understanding the concept of average. Like on average, everybody's just average. You might be great at one thing, but you're going to be terrible at some other stuff because of that. And on average, you're just going to be pretty average in pretty much everything. And I think that social media makes us think that we should be some other way. Like I should be exceptional at this, I should be perfect at that, I should be this and that. And it's just like, nah, I'm just kind of an average aging guy. That's it.
Mm. It's
Hmm.
funny. It's like if you ever read like big regrets of people that were dying, right? Like, most of them are things that like they didn't get to be themselves, basically. They
Hmm.
didn't hang out with friends more. They didn't spend time with people that loved them.
Hmm.
They were too focused on work, too focused on things that ultimately at the end of the day don't matter. And this
Hmm.
is also part of Taoism too, is recognizing like we're natural beings, right? Like there's an end to this. It's like
Hmm.
nothing carries over. We don't bring anything with us. You know, when we die, do we matter anymore in the grand scheme of things? Like any of that stuff that we gained, it doesn't. Doesn't mean
Hmm.
anything. And so it's kind of, I think, trying to get into that sense of like, well, what really matters now? What's important now? And acting with that. I always thought Taoism has a very sort of, there's a lot of overlap with like authenticity and that idea,
Hmm.
because it's like, when you're acting in a way that's so right for you, it's like it takes no effort.
Hmm.
And that's like Wu-Wei, right? Like
Hmm.
Nietzsche talks about like, authenticity. It's like it's almost like you're acting in a way where like it's like instinctual because
Hmm.
what you're doing aligns so correctly with you that it's like it's just the only choice.
Hmm.
Right. And I think that's kind of similar in this context where you're doing what's so right for you that it aligns perfectly. It's almost like there's no effort. It feels right.
Hmm. Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Like you actually get to be you instead of trying to be a carbon copy of someone else or a copycat of someone
Yeah, or
else.
trying to live up to these things that you've been told you need to do, or trying to like, you're watching TV, social media, trying to get all this money because everybody else,
I,
you see all these people with money and like,
yeah, I always when you mention that stuff, I always think of the I think it was like the first chapter of The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, where he talks about this poet or artist or whatever, Thomas Bukowski, who basically was like a degenerate his entire life. He was an alcoholic, he was a philanderer, he like amounted to nothing, couldn't hold a job, like couldn't do anything, but he wrote some poetry, I think, if my memory serves, he wrote some poetry that he was recognized for posthumously, like when he died. And like But the thing is, and I think that's what he was talking about that in the beginning of the book, was like he was so authentically himself that he just didn't care. Like it didn't matter that he wasn't the best at this or the best at that because he was just him who was an alcoholic, a philanderer, all these other things, and that was it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's probably why if that work was like authentically him, it's probably why it was recognized afterwards. It was probably good, right? I
Hmm.
mean, that's the funny thing. I think that's the other. It's also funny too because like a lot of stuff we do. I think about this a lot because like writing, right? Like I've been trying to do more creative writing, and it's I always find it's the hardest to do when I'm thinking about like what I think people would want or what I think the audience would want, something like that, because I think we do this a lot where we, instead of doing what's natural to us or right for us when we're doing things that we want to do, especially creative stuff, we try to make it with a pre-formed idea of the audience or who we're targeting. And it's so it becomes for them rather than for us, or
Mm,
becomes, an
yeah.
expression for them rather than an expression of ourselves.
Yeah, that was another interesting thing because that dude who wrote Morgan Housel, who wrote The Art of Spending Money, he was talking about like internal versus external motivations, and he was saying how he's always written stuff for himself. And I was like, I mean, good on him because he has like two incredible bestsellers that he's just done writing stuff for himself. And it's like, yeah, that's great, but wow, pretty darn lucky.
Yeah, it is lucky. I mean, but I think if you write something for yourself, it's gonna be though probably way better than anything you could write,
Hmm.
for someone else because it's you, right? It's an expression of you rather than
Hmm.
being trying to conform to something.
Sure.
And I think that's
And
the thing
maybe
we
it's
all
him
face.
being in the flow, him being in the
Yeah,
current and not going against it, trying to write something else that's not truly him.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting too, because like they do use water so much in Taoism too as an explanation for
Hmm.
this, and I think it does work well. Like just to read a couple, like it's like water flows downhill without effort.
Hmm.
Think of like plants growing without planning, seasons change without command. Like I think these natural sort of cycles are
Yeah.
important in Taoism to recognize too, because we are animals. I think
I
this is the thing we
wonder
forget the most.
I
You
wonder
know?
if Taoism has all these water things because we live on a primarily water-based planet. We are primarily water-based life forms, you know? If,
Probably. It also is I think it's a very good. It just is a good sort of representation of this too for us, like mentally, conceptually, that like, because everybody understands that, right? You think of the river. If you're trying to get somewhere and you're in a river, everybody's walking. If you're walking against the current, you're going to be spending so much energy, dude, to get there.
Dude, but
Whereas if you can
also
find a way to do it with it, you'll get there with almost no effort, right?
it
It's
also
so
blew my
easy.
it also blew my mind like in science class how water's like the only thing that when you freeze it it expands. Like everything
Yeah,
else
I
you
know. It is
freeze it gets
weird.
smaller, water freeze it. It's like there's something crazy going on. And
Yeah.
Bruce Lee says be like water, my friend. Hmm. Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's like it can fit through everything. It finds a way through stuff to get to where it's going. It can like it's
Hmm.
very, it's very flexible, right?
Hmm.
Like water, it doesn't, it can both carve paths through mountains, but it
Hmm.
also will divert around stuff. Like it's really
Yeah.
interesting. It takes the easiest path, right? And I think that's kind of interesting too, but it's also very strong. Because I think that's the other problem too. I think a lot of times when people first read these types of philosophies, they think they're kind of like, maybe from Western perspective, I don't know if this is the right word, but weak or something, where
Hmm. Yeah.
it's not as aggressive. But I
Hmm.
think that's wrong because there's probably more strength in this than in our way of doing things. It's just understanding it, right?
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Very
think, I
interesting.
mean, yeah, I love this concept. I'm glad I was recommended this idea. And I think, yeah, if you want to get more into it, definitely check out the Tao Te Ching. It's really fun to read. Just take your time with it. There's tons of stuff online you can find for help. And,
Hmm.
I think with Wu-Wei too, remember, it's like you just want to do what's appropriate for you, right? Do what's right, act within that flow, not against it. And you'll find things are a lot better.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those, I think it's a skill. Like a lot of people probably hear about it and they're like, man, I wish I had that where I could do it. But it's really like more of a skill where you just start to notice when you are putting
Yeah.
effort into action.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, yeah, I think it's akin to like, right, like developing virtues or something. Like it's something you can cultivate. It's
Mhm.
something that's going to take time, but the more you understand and the more you understand yourself, the more you can get into this place where this seems right and natural and makes sense. And you understand it better, you know? Yeah. So there you have it. right? The Taoist concept of Wu-Wei, effortless action. I hope you guys like this episode. If you have suggestions, feel free to email us or drop a comment on any of our YouTube videos. We have tons of episodes. You can catch them out wherever you want, YouTube, and on your podcast. We'll be back next week with another episode, though. Until then, later, Randy.
Later, Danny.